We think we're live. We are potentially live. Shabbat Shalom, folks. Yes, we are live. Shabbat Shalom, folks. It's so nice to see all of you joining us from wherever you happen to be this evening. We are going to begin just singing in the energy of Shabbat together, whether you've had a difficult week or a joyful week, whether you are breathing a sigh of relief that we finally reached Friday, or whether you still have a lot more to tackle ahead of you. We just take this moment together this evening. We set aside whatever might be bothering us, whatever might be on our minds, whatever's weighing heavy on us. Not to pretend it doesn't exist, of course, but to just kind of take it, put it in a box for a moment. We're going to take that box, we're going to put it to the side, and we can get back to it later. Like all the texts and the emails and the stresses and the errands and the chores, those will all be there. Don't worry. They will all be there in a bit. So we just take a moment to just put that aside for now. Just check in with yourself. Find yourself in a comfortable position. There is no wrong way to Shabbat. So if you're laying flat on your back, sitting in a seat, lounging, standing, walking, whatever you're doing is perfectly fine. And we welcome in Shabbat together with Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharetz, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem l'shalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mi melech malachei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu. Barchuni l'shalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mi melech malachei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu. Tzeitchem l'shalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mi melech malachei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu. Shabbat Shalom again, wherever you're joining us from. If you are... people should be able to comment on YouTube. I know we made a transition recently from Facebook to YouTube, but I mean, people should still be able to comment. If you want to type in the chat where you're joining us from, wish each other Shabbat Shalom, say hi, check in, connect. We're so glad that all of you are here, whether this is your first time tuning into Mishkan Services, your 100th time tuning into Mishkan Services, whether you've been a member of our community for eons, whether you've only just discovered us, whether you know the Hebrew or don't know the Hebrew, you're welcome here, and you're part of this sacred community, helping welcome Shabbat together to celebrate. We are 17 days into Pride Month. We are rolling in Chicago, at least. We're rolling into Pride festivities this weekend in honor of these festivities, in honor of this celebration, in honor of the history, the people who have paved the way for us to enjoy the freedoms we have today and who inspire us to continue to do the important, the difficult work that we still have to do to secure equity and safety and affirmation for our LGBTQ siblings. We'll be joined a bit later with a pre-recorded conversation with one of my good friends, Rabbi Mike Moskowitz, an amazing ally to the LGBTQ community, somebody who's definitely worth hearing from. Would have loved to be here tonight, but he is Shomer Shabbat in a very traditional sense, so we had to do a pre-record since he wouldn't necessarily Zoom on Shabbat. But definitely a conversation I hope that you enjoy. But that's in a little bit. First, we have some blessings to do. I think for those of you who've joined a few weeks ago, I spoke about this, but I think it's a bit worth repeating. There's a lot of difficulty in the world around us. There's a lot of hard stuff, whether it's hard stuff in our own lives, the heartbreak of loss, of uncertainty, whatever obstacles we might be facing spiritually, mentally, physically, and then there's a lot of brokenness in the world around us. It can seem a bit indulgent. You know, I'm walking around the streets of Boys Town where I live, and there's rainbow flags everywhere, and there's music pumping out of windows, and there's people laughing and celebrating. It can seem a bit indulgent to engage in this kind of pride at this time of year. But I really believe that joy can be such a deep an incredible act of resistance against a world that would ask us to despair, against a world that would tell us to give up, against a world that would say, maybe it's better if I just stayed home and did nothing. To go out, to find joy in who we are and who other people are, to celebrate the diversity, the beauty of humankind, to lift each other up with laughter and song and dance. Yes, there is hard work to be done, and we will do that work, but we cannot do that work if we don't also sustain and celebrate ourselves. And so this is a moment, this Shabbat, as we roll into these next few weeks of celebrations around the world and here in Chicago, to really, really embrace that joy, not as a superfluous or indulgent activity, but actually a serious spiritual work. A serious spiritual work. That this, what we're doing right now, is serious spiritual work. It is an act of resistance against a world that would tell us to work 24/7, against a world that would tell us to be small and to disappear, against a world that would tell us to be ashamed of who we are. We take time for rest and reconnection and celebration with each other. If you have candles and want to light candles with me, we'll be doing that now to bring just a little more light, literal light, into the world as we bring our metaphorical light as well. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom, folks. We continue with Ana Bechoach. Ana Bechoach, Bechoach, Gedulat Yemincha, Yemincha, Tatir Tzerura, Kabel Rinatamcha, Sagmeinu Tarenu Nora. Ana Bechoach, Bechoach, Gedulat Yemincha, Yemincha, Tatir Tzerura, Kabel Rinatamcha, Sagmeinu Tarenu Nora. Ana Bechoach, Gedulat Yemincha, Tatir Tzerura, Tatir Tzerura, Kabel Rinatamcha, Sagbeinu Tarenu Nora. Ana Bechoach, Gedulat Yemincha, Tatir Tzerura, Tatir Tzerura, Kabel Rinatamcha, Sagbeinu Tarenu Nora. Yamai dai 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 dai, 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 Yamai dai dai. We welcome in Shabbat, we turn to Lecha Dodi to welcome in that energy, whatever it is that you need this Shabbat. We think about what is it that I need, what is it that I need to welcome into this space celebration, joy, pride, relaxation, reconnection, friendship, family, love, rest, self-care, whatever it is that you need. We welcome that into the space together. Lecha dodi likarat kala pene Shabbat nehekabela. Lecha dodi likarat kala pene Shabbat nehekabela. Shamor וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד, אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם ולתפארת ולתהילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם נסוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תהילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לא תבושי ולא תקמי, מה תתוכחי ומה תחמי, בך יחסו אני ועמי, ונבנתה עיר על תילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. והיונים שיסה שוסייך, ורחקו קומב עלייך, יסיס עלייך אלוהייך, כי משוש חתן על כלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. ימים ושמאל תפרוצי, ואת אדוני תעריצי, אל ידיש בן פרצי, ונשמחה ונגילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. I invite you to rise as you're able. If you're near a door or a window, open it. We're welcoming in Shabbat, the Shabbat Queen. Kind of like a Yas Queen moment here. We're inviting her in. And we're saying, welcome, welcome. What is it that I need right now? We face that entrance and we bow together. בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, פני שבת nekabela. Welcome Shabbat, welcome all of you. It is my great honor and joy to introduce our guest for this evening, Rabbi Mike Moskowitz. You'll hear about more in just a second. We're going to cue the video up. Enjoy. So I'm super excited to be joined by Rabbi Mike Moskowitz, who is not only an amazing educator and ally. He currently serves as the scholar in residence for trans and queer Jewish studies at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, the LGBTQ synagogue of New York City, one of the oldest and largest LGBTQ plus congregations in the world. He's also an amazing colleague and friend of mine, and it is a delight to have you here to talk a bit today about in the theme of Pride Month, allyship, the work that you're doing, and maybe some things that we could be thinking about now that we're about halfway through this season of reflecting on both the joys, but also the challenges that face the LGBTQ plus community. So welcome.
Rabbi, thank you so much for having me. It is always a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
I would love, just because I know some of your story, but I think most people who are tuning in don't necessarily know some of your background. If you want to just share, how did you get into this space of thinking seriously about allyship and work with the LGBTQ plus community, in particular, the trans and non-binary and genderqueer communities?
Yeah, sure. It certainly wasn't on the syllabus in my yeshiva. I studied in Lakewood, BMG, and in the Mir in Yerushalayim, the two largest yeshivas in the world, and they're Lithuanian, right-wing yeshivas. And then I was employed in New York City as a rabbi of an Orthodox synagogue, and I was doing Jewish outreach at Columbia University, employed, by these right-wing organizations. When somebody in my family actually came out as trans and said, "I'm not a girl, I'm a boy," and I was completely ill-equipped. I had no idea. I said to him, "What do you mean? I know I'm a guy. How do you know that you're a guy?" It's the same way. And I started speaking to my rabbis, and it was very clear immediately that they had actually never met somebody of trans experience that they knew of. And you can't answer a question in Jewish law until you understand the reality of the subject. And so I reached out to Keshet, which is a wonderful national organization out of Boston, and the gender studies folks at Columbia. And I really started to listen to the lived experiences and to recognize, as one student of mine who was trans at the time said, no one's life is ever hypothetical. And one of the struggles as rabbis is that when we study the Talmud, everything's theoretical, right? Person gets out of jail or Yom Kippur, there's only enough time to do one mitzvah. That person doesn't have a pulse. That person doesn't have a face. That person doesn't have a heart. And so when there's a person, a human being created in the image of the divine, saying, I don't know where I fit in a tradition of gender-based spiritual practice. Can you help me? And I felt like I want to help you, but I don't know what any of these words mean. I don't know what you're saying. I don't understand any of it. And it took a couple of weeks before I got to what I think is a relatively evolved space of simply knowing that I don't know. That as somebody who's cisgender, I have a limited awareness of gender to my body. And that space of knowing that I don't know has actually been deeply generative for me. We just celebrated Shavuos, and the verse says, the entire nation saw the sounds. Most people don't see the sounds, most people don't have sestisha. But the Torah wasn't given for just most people. The Torah was given for the most extreme of experiences, for all of the people. There were no margins, there were no other. It was given to one person, like one heart, because it was only given to the nation. And so the Torah speaks to these ideas. And so I kind of started off on the quest to uncover and to discover the divine will. Part of my theology is that the Torah is immutable and eternal and infinite, and as a result, God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai about these questions. And so that's really when I started getting into it. It was about 6 years ago, and it's been an incredible journey, and I feel so blessed because what I've come to understand is that these experiences and even the language, which is always going to be deficient, it's never going to be as expansive as the experiences they come to describe, are not limited to LGBT experiences, but they're not even limited to the human experience. They have their source in the divine. I see, the divine revelation is God's coming out speech. The first of the 10 Commandments is God letting us know who God is. And the sin of the golden calf is so horrific because just 40 days later, God's saying, I don't understand. I told you who I am. Why don't you believe me? Why are you erasing my existence? So the language that I think the queer community, particularly the genderqueer community, has offered to this conversation. There's a way in which very selfishly, I feel like they've been my ally, that they've allowed me to understand God in a much more holistic and complete way. And so, part of what I think we all understand about allyship is that it's awkward, not just because it's predicated on people being dehumanized and often being objectified, but it's as elusive as it is aspirational. It's so person specific that what can be really affirming and validating and supportive to one can unfortunately be traumatic and even offensive to another. And as a result, I feel like sometimes people are hesitant to, and I think for me, it was a big process of this is not my lane. It's just, I'm a rabbi, I'm straight, I'm cis. And so part of the process that for me is very much still ongoing is feeling a level of comfort of this is the right thing to do. And the awkwardness is less awkward than being silent and complicit in perpetuating all of the hurtful things that society supports.
It's I absolutely just want to circle back for 10 seconds. The image of Shavuot, of Revelation, which we just celebrated being God's coming out. But especially I love how you link that to, right, the sin of the golden calf was, I think, the sin that maybe a lot of us can commit when somebody reveals who they are and we hold on maybe to the image, the idol of who we want them to be or who we expected them to be. And what a powerful metaphor, particularly around many people's experience of coming out, of declaring ourselves and saying, no, this is who I am. And then really struggling with family members, loved ones, friends who kind of are having a hard time letting go of the image they constructed of who they expected us to be. I love that. I'm holding on to that.
No, that's yours. You said it much better than I did. That's beautiful. Thank you.
And I think one of the remarkable things too is, you talk about allyship being awkward because we're entering a space of not knowing, of not having maybe all the answers, of having to listen to people who are unlike us, to ask, right, what is it that you need? Because I don't know. To be in that space of unknowing can be really difficult. We like to stay in the lanes that we know well. I think what's so remarkable about your story, though, is that you not only kind of left the lane that you knew so well, but you really entered very bravely a space of not knowing and of really just showing up. You are a deeply Jewishly motivated person. So what's Jewish about the act of allyship? Where in your Judaism does that kind of leaving your lane to enter the space of unknowing and showing up and bring your presence? Where does that come from?
I love the way you asked that question. It's so interesting. What do we know about God? What do we know about anything? The Kuzi writes, to know God would be to be God, because God is infinite. And if we could understand the infinite, we'd have ourselves be infinite. So we attach to the belief that there is this infinite source of the universe that is good. And I would say the one thing that we know about God is that God is one, God is singular, God is echad. And that sense of unity, that sense of me being part of that source, that singular source, I think is what motivates me to care. If I want to have a relationship with God as a parent, I need to take care of all of God's children as my siblings. And when we look around the world, this is simply not the way in which one treats family. And I think part of the destruction that we observe, the last 2,000 years of the temple, is that we're all coming from a broken home now. Like because of that blatant hatred, that sinas chinam, we weren't able to coexist as a family, and so God refuses to kind of be at the head of the table at home. And so a consequence of that is that we all took different parts of our tradition, and historically the right took learning and the left took tikkun olam and feeling, and as a result, just we're all deficient. And so there's more holiness when there's more people, and there's more God when there's more unity. In fact, the rabbis tell us again by Shavuot that it was because we were unified that God was able to reflect God's self in each one of us to give us, that. So I think what draws me to allyship, which in Judaism, I think the Hebrew word for ally is the word chaver, and chaver normally we translate as friend, but it actually means to attach. If something's attached to the ground, it's mechuber l'karka. An author is a mechaber; they attach words and thoughts and ideas to paper, and so that chibur, that connectivity, is part of the covenants of Arvos, where each guarantors for the other. And if somebody's suffering, that means that there's an aspect of me that's suffering, and so a lot of it is a function of networking the needs and the resources. But I think what ultimately motivates me is that I don't think there's a more powerful or efficient or intimate way of showing God how much we care about God than by taking care of God's creations.
Mm. You reminded me, I attended a Reclaim Pride march this past weekend that was focusing on centering some of the voices that tend to be marginalized within the LGBTQ plus community. And in particular, the focus was on trans voices, and in particular on Black and brown trans voices, particularly trans women, who tend to really bear the greatest burden of discrimination, of hatred, of violence, of any element of the LGBTQ plus community. And the point was that if we show up for and take care of the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, that the issues that affect them really, really affect us all. And in doing the tikkun and doing the fix of protecting and holding and uplifting those folks, we are all beneficiaries of that. Rather than kind of the trickle down approach of focusing on the issues, right, that maybe only affect the most privileged or the most powerful. The question I had there, though, is so much of our allyship feels in this moment as reactive.
Yeah.
We're finding out that Black and brown trans women are the most vulnerable in our community, and all of a sudden we're reacting to a reality that they've lived with their entire lives. And I know you have some thoughts on the reactivity of allyship, and maybe a better approach that we could be taking.
Yeah, even in English, the word ally is often used on this side being against this side. It's the ally powers, and it comes from the Latin to bind, like an alloy. But I think within the Jewish tradition, one of the contributions it makes to the conversation is that it's meant to be restorative. That if we were all connected, like one person with one body, with one heart, it never would have gotten this bad. And so I think a restorative model, where we are so aware of what's going on within humanity, right, within our earth, that our fingers are on the pulse all the time, that we would never allow voter suppression, mass incarceration, climate, all of the things to get to where they are right now. And then the fact that it's shocking to us, right, that the average life expectancy of a trans woman of color is so low. That should be shocking to us, is itself a symptom of the fact that we are complicit in the othering, because we don't even know that they exist. We didn't know that to be true. And I think what Judaism asks of us is that there should be no other. How can there be an other, right? If their children are less significant than our children, right, then we don't see them as God's children. So, there's a great verse by Joseph and his brothers. The verse testifies that the brothers, saw him from afar and sought to do him harm. From a distance, it's much easier to dehumanize. And society tells us, right, those are not your people, right? Those people live in a different zip code. They speak a little bit differently. They don't go to the same schools that you go to, right? I've heard people say that the greatest indicator of success is it's not about the person's IQ, it's about the person's zip code, right? Where do you live, right? It's, do you have access to food, right? Do you have access to basic resources? And so one of the things that's so difficult in this society is that it perpetuates these like a caste system, and also the inability to even gain access to the lived experiences. And so there's no substitute for that relationship building. All organizing is really reorganizing, right? And so I think part of what the ask is if you don't know a trans woman of color, right? So then, like, whose fault is that, right? Like, if you don't, know somebody who's, incarcerated right now, and therefore, like, you don't understand how bad the system is, like, whose fault? Like, it's obnoxious to ask those who are already oppressed, right, and already struggling, to dig deeper, to make it easier for us to be able to understand how we shouldn't feel guilty about our lives that look so unrecognizably different. And so, like, if we care, right, like, just like rabbis can't answer questions until we know the reality of something, you can't be an effective contributor in society, right? One just easy way to think about this is that when this country was formed, the only people who had power were white men. And over time, some of that has changed. But, like, the starting point is that if you weren't that, and really Christian, you weren't part of it. And so there's so much work to be done. And for people who feel like, oh, well, I've made it, I'm okay. Like, it's not about you, right? That the privilege is not something to feel guilty or ashamed about, but it is a commodity. And it is something that should make you feel encumbered. To the extent that any of us have the ability to do something, is to the extent that we're responsible. And we all have the ability to do something, because God wouldn't put us in this world if we were extra. If this world didn't need us, we wouldn't be here. There's no such thing as extra people. So that's really the question. And I think that's how Hillel frames it. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me, because nobody else is me. So part of the work of being an ally is actually, like, knowing what can I bring to the table. Like, we are all so resourced in different ways of being talented and gifted, and just in proximity to the people in our families, that there's a lot that we can do. But if we don't recognize our own resources, and we don't recognize the needs of the moment, so then, like, we have nothing to work with.
Yeah. You reminded me so much of a lesson that I took from our mutual colleague, Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, the senior rabbi of CBST, who has so often said, right, that if you're alive at this moment, it's because you have something to bring the world that is needed. And that's such an important and really radical lesson of our tradition. I apologize to the Mishkanites who've heard me say this a million times. This is one of my probably core teachings, but I think it's because it's so important, which is it's amazingly radical that our tradition begins with the creation of the entire world. And in that creation narrative, because so many of the other ancient Near Eastern creation narratives really focus on the beginning of a people, right? Babylonians, Sumerians, et cetera. But like our tradition, like, Jews don't show up for a few chapters. Like, we actually begin with everybody. And in that kind of mythic accounting of creation, we make this incredibly radical assertion that A, we all have the same origin, all human beings, and B, right, that origin is the divine image. We had a really great conversation around Shavuot. I was challenging some folks to think of whether the 10 Commandments were sufficient or not. And we looked at a few of the proposals, right, that the rabbis made of, like, kind of additional commandments. And right, one of them is these are the generations of Adam, right? That the statement that we're all created from the same source, so that none of us can say, right, my ancestor is greater than your ancestor, right? So that none of us can say, that I'm more worthy or more valuable than you, right? Because we all come from the same place. I think speaks really strongly to the messages that you're sharing.
Absolutely. And there's just, like, one, like, super powerful observation is that if you look at the Genesis narrative, God created billions of, bugs, and, each according to their own kind, and billions of trees, each according to billions of fish, and all the things. But when it comes to people, there aren't different kinds of people, right? There's just one person. And it's exactly to your point that we all come from the same, but there's something like that. It's not just that we all come from the same, but we all really are the same, And I think we're so much more similar than we are different in any possible way. And I think the more that we feel that sense of responsibility, that I'm not okay with what's happening in the humanity that I am part of, right? It doesn't make a difference where it's happening. That it's happening is disturbing. Yeah.
So I'm curious because allyship is awkward because it's coming to a space where we don't have the answers, maybe where we actually need to give up some of our control that we're used to, maybe even give up some of the privilege or the power that we're used to holding. And I say this as a cisgender white male, that that those spaces are not for me to center myself, and that can be really hard to kind of like let go of that control and to say like I don't know, actually I don't have the answers. But another challenge of allyship is the fact that sometimes we have to sit at the table with people with whom we disagree, with people who maybe don't understand some of the pain or the brokenness that we carry into that space, as Jews, for example. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that kind of challenge of allyship, because we've seen so much fracturing of
Yeah.
positions. Even the fact that I was at the Reclaim Pride March was because, right, there's been fracturing in the LGBTQ community around corporate sponsorship and police presence and racism and all really important issues, but we
Yeah.
really like a pulling apart of
Yeah.
coalitions.
Yeah. It's a real struggle. I mean, I had this yesterday. One of my best friends from yeshiva was involved in setting up in New York City an event with the governor of Florida. It was a Jewish event, and so he spoke, and there were protests. And it's hard because we're supposed to love each person. And when we feel this deep clarity of how wrong they are and how hurtful and harmful it is, it takes extra work to say, I don't love you less because you're actually wrong. I think there's space between intention and impact. There are people who are, as an extreme example, I mean, there are people who are homophobic because they think that God's homophobic, and they're not taking it personally. The Torah is homophobic, so what do you want from me? I think there's a unique challenge in even that extreme example of saying you're not less human than I just because you're trying to dehumanize me. I'm not going to reciprocate. And I think in the last 50 years we've seen so much greater advancement around LGBT issues as opposed to, let's say, around racial equity and equality. Because when you can get to know somebody and find out they're an amazing human, and then come to learn that they're trans or queer, so then it forces you to and challenges one's own stereotypes and prejudices, where when it comes to presenting with a particular skin color, often people come with those things and never allow for it. So when we separate and we say, listen, I'm not going to be in conversation with you because you see the world differently than I, you perceive the world differently, you move the world through the world differently, we're not making it easier at all. And there's a way in which we're just repackaging the hate, right? So there's this great teaching that I have from one of my rebbeim, that the rabbis say that the order of Havdalah, the ceremony of separation from the Sabbath to the weekday, was established in Yavna. Yavna was a city of scholars, but Yavna is also it's an anagram. It's an acronym for Yayin Ner B'Samim, right? The order of Havdalah spells Yavna. But he also wanted to say homiletically that there's an order of separation, right? A person says something that you don't like, you can't walk away. You have to walk away from somebody, to move away from somebody. You have to first try to engage, let's grab us some coffee, let's grab a drink, right? If casually that doesn't work. So let's, the nair is the cerebral, the intellectual, the wisdom. In the world of ideas, do you want to live in a place where there's no room for anyone but you? There needs to be the diversity of humanity because humanity is diverse. Anyways, the only time we can really walk away from somebody is when we can't walk any closer. And it used to be that a person observed the world differently. That was intriguing. I'm curious. I want to understand how is it you came to these conclusions, and that invited the conversation. And now it precludes it. So we all have something to learn from each other. And sometimes, unfortunately, the data is negative. We're seeing a lot of sliding in this country. And it's really worth doing a deeper dive to understand why that is. But it's not going to get better if we disengage. It just isn't. And so I think part of the framework that I find to be helpful theologically is the more difficult it is, the more an act of resistance it is, right? To be at a table with people who don't want you to be there is itself a powerful act of unity and solidarity, which is an act of resistance against those who are trying to other us. That I'm not willing to give up on you. And you can't fear that attitude, but you do hope that that people reciprocate.
And I really appreciate that framing. I love the Havdalah, the use of Havdalah as this recognition of difference, but also when that accommodates, right, both the need to engage. But I really appreciate what you also said, which is that sometimes separation is necessary when you can't walk any closer. And so I think that also recognizes that there are moments when, for one's own safety, one's well-being, you may have to choose to distance yourself a little bit. But then when we are in a space where maybe we're uncomfortable but not unsafe, right? That's maybe when we do lean in a bit more and say, look, I'm going to show up for this person, even though I maybe vehemently disagree with their stance. So I think it's a good place to pause the conversation for now. I already know, having spent many years working the same building as you and sneaking down to your office to pop in for like a 10-minute chat that would then turn into like an hour and a half chat, where these conversations can go, because you carry so much wisdom and so much heart in a way that is just a blessing to us all. But thank you again for joining us.
It's always a pleasure.
And for sharing of yourself. And I want to just leave off with a small anecdote, which is when we're ordained as rabbis, we often choose the teacher whom we want to have lay their hands on us and kind of put that official stamp, if you will, right? This kind of chain of tradition that's gone all the way back to Moses and Joshua, of designating leaders in our community, one generation to the next. And for those of you who don't know, I chose Rabbi Mike to be the person to do that for me, because you really embody, I think, what it means to be a rabbi and a Jew, which is to take great risks for standing up for what's right. And I know your journey is just such a testament to that. Came at the cost of a lot, but in return for everything you've given, you've created so much space in our community for those who've felt for a long time they don't have a home here. So what a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's been one of the highlights of my rabbinic career was that moment when you were on stage, and just to reaffirm that the space actually belongs to you. The space belongs to people, and that there's some pride in Judaism that needs to be reclaimed as well. So thank you again for this opportunity, and it's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you. We're back. Actually, I pulled up, I can share my screen. Yes, I can share my screen. I actually pulled up the photo that we were referring to. This is the photo of my ordination of Rabbi Mike Moskowitz, giving me smicha of laying his hands on my head as when I was ordained. I thought I'd share the photo for those who were following along. We are going to continue with prayers for healing in particular. If you're thinking of somebody, whether near to you, far away, in need of healing of mind, of body, or of spirit. In particular, I think of all those this Pride Month in the LGBTQ community who are living in dangerous situations, living in unsafe situations, who are seeking that community, that love, that space, that allyship that Rabbi Mike talked about. We'll continue with Hashki Venu, prayer for healing. If you want to share in the chat the names of anybody you're thinking of, we send this blessing their way. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom V'ha'amidenu Shomreinu lechaim Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom V'ha'amidenu Shomreinu lechaim Ufros aleinu Sukat shalomecha Ufros aleinu Sukat shalomecha Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom Ve'ha'amidenu shomreinu l'chaim. Ufros aleinu sukat shalomecha. Ufros aleinu sukat shalomecha. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom Ve'ha'amidenu shomreinu l'chaim. Some blessings of refuah shlema, a complete and quick recovery to each and every person we thought of this evening. On the road to recovery, days of comfort and nights of peace. And to that we can say Amen. We're going to continue by remembering those who are no longer with us. There's those in our community who've experienced recent losses, but we also think of those we've lost in seasons past. If you are thinking of somebody today, and either in a period of mourning or observing a yard site and want to share their name in the chat, I invite you to do so. I invite you to rise as you're able for Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah ve'alma divra chirutei ve'amlich malchutei v'chayachon uvyomechon uv'chayei zechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala uvizman kari v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam umei mayam Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitraman v'yitnaseh V'yit hadar, v'yit aleh, v'yit halal, shemeh, dekudusha, brichu. Ela minkol birchata v'shirata, tushpechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlam rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel, Vimru, Amen. May the memories of all we've recalled today be for a blessing. May we be a blessing to their memories in turn. We are reaching the end of our time together. We're going to take a moment to say Kiddush over wine or grape juice, whatever you have on hand. Ta-da! This is like your 5-second warning if you want to run and get something. But we're gonna begin together. Vayer vayvoker yom hashishi vayechulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol tzevam vayechol Elohim bayom hashvi'i melachto asher asa vayishbot bayom hashvi'i mikol melachto asher asa vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i vaykadesh oto kivo shavat mikol melachto asher bara Elohim la'asod. So God did a lot of stuff in 6 days, and on the 7th day God rested, and so we also take a moment to rest, because if God can do it, you can do it too. Savri Chavarai, with permission, my friends. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushan mitzotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho, be'ahava u'ratzon hinchilanu, zikaron lema'aseh v'reshit, ki hu yom techila lemikra'e kodesh, zecher letziat Mitzrayim. Kivanu v'charta ve'otanu kidashta im kol hamim, v'shabbat kodshecha ve'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat. Amen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this Shabbat. I hope the conversation with Rabbi Mike was interesting, inspiring, as you think about allyship and what it means to not only be an ally for the LGBTQ plus community this month of Pride, but also what it means to stand in solidarity with people of all different backgrounds, including those with whom we find difficult or we disagree. That is the challenge, and that is the call of our tradition, and the reminder of this month that together, when we can be in dialogue, we can lift each other up, and we can hold each other accountable, we can achieve great things. We're going to close out with Ose Shalom, a prayer for peace for all those parts of the world that are still waiting to experience peace for everyone in our communities who is waiting to experience peace, and peace to all of you this Shabbat, that you might also experience peace. Ose Shalom bimromav, Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru, amen. Ose shalom bimromav, Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru, amen. Yum ba da 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 da, yum ba da da da, yum ba da da da, ya da da da, yum ba da da da, yum ba da da, yum ba da da, yum ba da da. Oh, say shalom bimromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru, amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone. May the one who makes peace on high make peace for all of us, for all of Israel, for the entire world. It's that we can say amen. I hope you have a wonderful, peaceful, restful, celebratory, joy-filled Shabbat, no matter what you're doing, no matter where you are. Shabbat shalom.